Hey there, and thanks for tuning in to Squash Radio. My name is Connor Malley, and I'm your host. Before we get into the show, I wanted to share a little bit about me and why Squash Radio exists. So, I've been a passionate squash player for over 20 years, but what makes my path slightly different from your average squash player is I've also made squash my career. I've worn almost every hat and worked in almost every role in the industry. Some quick examples are, I've gone from being a volunteer at a professional event to then becoming the CEO of the US Open. I've gone from trying to make Team USA to then becoming the director of all national team activity for US Squash. And I've certainly gone from just playing on squash courts to focusing on how the sport can grow in the United States. What has been a big part of fueling my passion all these years are the fascinating, passionate, and dedicated people involved in our sport. So, Squash Radio, well, that's just a way to try and help share those stories. We hope you like it, and if you do, please share, comment on any of the social media platforms, or email us at squashradio@gmail.com. That's squashradio@gmail.com. Our biggest challenge is trying to get the word out, so any help is much appreciated. Without further ado, please enjoy the show. Hey there, before we get started, I have one more quick thing to share. So I started this podcast over 3 years ago, and the last time I had posted an episode was back in January 2018. Around that time, several factors pulled me away from being able to continue this podcast, and in no particular order, everything from burnout, increased work demands, but I also had a death in the family and I had a loved one battling cancer. So it was tough to keep this up. But throughout those times, I always wondered and wanted to pick up Squash Radio where I'd left it. So this past February, March was my inspiration. It back started, and I found a path that I think might be doable. But then our world changed, and the impact of the global pandemic coupled with the aftermath of George Floyd and reconciling the social injustice in our country, it just didn't seem like it was the time I could carve out for Squash Radio. I'm still not sure if it's the right time, but I believe and hope that some of these stories might be able to inspire even just one person, and who knows what difference that can make. So with that said, here I am trying to give it another shot. So coming up, we have the interview with David K, and I just wanted to timestamp it that it was recorded back in mid-March, so just as the full impact of COVID was hitting the United States. Please keep that in mind for our conversation. What about this?
This call is being recorded.
For some quick background on our guest today, here's a quick overview. We talk with David K, who is the CEO of MetroSquash, a thriving nonprofit after-school youth program based in Chicago. During his 15 years at the helm of MetroSquash, he's helped raise millions and millions of dollars, including building a permanent $10 million facility. It houses 8 squash courts, office spaces, classrooms, and now he's even expanding to another location. He works with over 20 staffers, more than 100 volunteers, a 60-person auxiliary board with a board of directors of 40 people. All these people work together so that they can help enrich the lives of over 400 students in Chicago. His path here, well, David's originally from Canada. He rose through the ranks of junior squash and ended up going to Princeton. There he helped them win a national team championship. After college, he continued to pursue squash even more, becoming a teaching professional as well as a head college coach and soaring to the ranks of world number 2 on the Pro Doubles Tour. David has always thrived on pushing himself through challenges, which include getting an MBA while working. In karate, he got to the brown belt with black tips, and he's even traveled to all 7 continents and has climbed Mount Kilimanjaro. David's a deep thinker and a doer who just pours his energy into bettering himself and the others around him to help make the world a better place for MetroSquash students, their parents, the alums, the staff, the volunteers, as well as the board. So here's our conversation. We hope you enjoy it. Hey there, squash fans. Welcome to another episode of Squash Radio. I'm your host, Connor Malley, and we're very excited to bring you another guest today calling in from Chicago, and that is the one and only David K. David, welcome to the show.
Hello, Connor. It's great to be with you.
So, just to give some context for people who might not be as familiar with you, you're the CEO of MetroSquash, which is entering its 15-year of operation. And to give some context over the past 15 years, can you briefly describe where it started and where it is today?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's great to be with you. And I think partly because MetroSquash really started with you and your efforts in 2003 to 2005. And I was able to, through our connection, able to come out to Chicago to be the first executive director of the program and help with the founding board that you had put together, about 5 or 6 people from the University of Chicago. And I think you had seen and we had seen the growth of urban squash on the East Coast, and starting with Boston, Harlem, the Bronx, and Philadelphia, and said, why not in Chicago? And now, fast forward 15 years later, it seems like, well, that was a no-brainer. And of course, it should be in Chicago and all over the country. But at the time, people thought, I think you were crazy, and they probably still think that. But the moving out to Chicago for me was a real leap of faith, and I think the founding board took a leap of faith in me as well. But it was very much a real bet on the future. Chicago has a great squash community, but there were the idea of urban squash in 2005 was still relatively new and still contained on the East Coast. So it's really exciting to be 15 years later and now have 400 students we're serving in the program. We have an $8 million center that's the largest facility in the Midwest and certainly in Chicago, at least for now. And we've also got a second satellite location in Evanston, and then hopefully with plans to do even more. So that's been an incredible journey for me, and been really great to partner with so many wonderful people in Chicago.
Yeah, I mean it's crazy to think about in 15 years starting off with just 12 students to where you are today. And it was against all the odds, so to speak. And I think quickly to sort of celebrate some of the major milestones that you've hit over the past 15 years, when you look back on it, what are some of the big ones that stand out to you?
Well, I'd always look at it from the student perspective first. I really think that the programs that, and first of all, I think we also have to go back to the original Greg Zaff, who was, I think, the one who originally believed in this idea in Boston. And that's when people really thought it was a crazy idea. I think in Chicago, we were able to say, this is a good idea. Look what they've been able to do on the East Coast. Greg,
Yeah, very true.
when he started, didn't have that opportunity. But I think we always come back, and I think a lot of the other everybody who's really invested in the network says squash is a wonderful game. The deep connection with education and with enrichment can have a huge transformative impact in students' lives. And there's a real sense that there's a lot of children in Chicago, across the country, and across the world who don't have the same opportunities as everybody else. And to be able to sort of look back and see some of the great results we've had from a student perspective, from an individual anecdotal basis, to seeing kids who started in 5th or 6th grade were really on a different path that was maybe not positive, to graduating from high school successfully. 100% of our kids have done that. 98% enrolled in college or post-secondary institution, and 88% of those kids on track to graduate within 6 years. So just some of the top level stats I'm really incredibly proud of. I think these programs really work, and I think it just goes to show that when you invest a lot of when you have a lot of people who caring adults who are really invested in kids' futures, it can have an incredible impact.
The program has been around long enough at this point that you're seeing a full life cycle of some of the students that were in the 5th and 6th grade now actually coming back to work at the program. So talk a little bit about some of or draw out one student that really kind of encapsulate that story.
Yeah, we have a number. We have 4 students who are working with us full time, and as development coordinator, college and careers coordinator, squash coordinator, and academic coordinator up in Evanston. I would talked about Khadija, who has started with us in 6th grade and went to Denison, played squash at Denison. And we were at that time when she graduated, I think 3 years ago now, we were looking to kind of build out our college and careers program. I think we saw students were graduating from college or they're enrolled in college, and we weren't doing enough to serve them in terms of helping them define what their next step is. And that doesn't mean that MetroSquash continues through somebody's professional career in terms of our services, but while students are with MetroSquash during the pathway, we wanted to arm students better with what they were doing in the future. So, spending more time working on internships, resume building, talking with our board and supporters in terms of possible careers, being able to see themselves in different industries so that when they graduate from college or post-secondary institution, they're really prepared, and it's not like they're starting from scratch. And so Khadija was a perfect person for us to talk to about this position of being a college and career coordinator. She just came in and, she actually came in and talked to the students before we thought about her in the role. And Janae, who's our chief program officer, saw her speak to the kids and saw how the kids, they just lit up and they were just so engaged and enthusiastic. And we said, gosh, let's figure out how to get Khadija to be working with the program full time. And I think it just goes to show how students will gravitate to somebody who has lived their shared experience. And it made such a huge difference to have Khadija on the team. And she's been with us now 2 years and is just doing an incredible job and really directly working with students in college and having a huge impact.
That's such an important adaptation or extension of your programming. I mean, here you are investing all of this time and energy with these students to then personally, that definitely resonates because when I graduated college, I almost felt more clueless than ever in my life, right? There's your tons of opportunity out there and you're just not quite sure what exactly direction you want to head in. So what a great thing to add in. And I think for me personally, I was able to turn to the squash community to ask others what they've done. And I just kept asking and suddenly things emerged. So to really create that guided experience is such an important last step on that journey.
That's right. And I think a lot of us underestimate the amount of social capital that we have. And so
Mm-hmm.
you're able to go to a squash group of squash friends. There's an expectation when you graduate, from college that family network, friend network and not every student has that network. And the idea of you want to be able to connect what you're doing with your degree, what you've studied. And I think we take that for granted that's an automatic. And so we want to be able to build those links to social capital for our students. It's something we talk about, but it's probably one of the things that we should talk about more because it's so important and often undervalued.
So speaking of networks, and I know we can sort of point towards the larger squash network in the United States and globally, but specifically in Chicago, what you've built out, I just love for you to tell some of the stats. I mean, they really are just very dramatic when you start spelling out all the staffers and auxiliary board of directors. So just share sort of those stats quickly.
Yeah, so let me start with the students in terms of who we're serving. So we say about 400 students that we're serving on an annual basis. That's 200 students in Evanston in middle school through college. We're up to about 35, 40 students in Evanston, and that'll be increasing by about 20 students a year for the next till we're up to 200 there. And then we serve another 150 students or so throughout the summer months for at least 4 weeks. So 400 students, that 250 of whom we're serving 8 hours a week over about 40 weeks of the year, and then an additional 150 students who we're serving a minimum of 4 weeks. So that's starting to have a real impact in terms of our imprint in Chicago and our ability to affect change. And then the people that are doing that work, we have 21 full-time staff, obviously a number of part-time staff, about 150 volunteers, 50 mentors. Our board of directors is quite large for the SEA network, which is our national governing body. And we have 40 board members, 60 auxiliary board members, which is a sort of board of younger people around under 35 years old. And our budget right now is about $2.5 million.
Wow. That's just, I mean, when you think to where it started to where it is today, that's a huge accomplishment. And a lot of that is, I know that's not any one individual. It's really the collective team that brings it all together. But you've been at the tip of the spear helping lead that charge. So that's just You have to look back and be pretty proud of what you've accomplished.
There's probably like, maybe 15 to 20 seconds once a month where I take a little joy in things. But to be honest, it's very much, I think, what's kept this work so exciting for me. And it really did change my life 15 years ago to really be able to focus on doing something that I really felt was having an impact. It really transformed my life personally and professionally. But it's also, and I think part of that is kind of that little uh, push of stress, anxiety, but also fulfillment and the balance between the two that has really been rewarding. But it's also they're just realities. I think every executive director or everybody who's leading an organization is always thinking about the things that can be challenging. You're always thinking about raising money. You're always thinking about good people, and that can be exciting, but can also be a little stressful. Like particularly right now, we have the coronavirus, which is impacting a lot of things in the market, and we're sort of wondering. We've done such great work. Obviously, you're invested in expanding and continuing, but there's always external factors that are challenging.
One of the things we were just connecting briefly in Chicago, and I'd love for you to share because I don't think this is really talked about as much, and this is going up to the SEA, so the Squash Education Alliance, where you guys have a board of directors and you serve on that. But one of the things that you guys provide is peer review of other programs, and I think that something isn't as known to the broader community. I'd love for you to touch on that and share your experiences with it.
Yeah, I think it's one of the great things I think SEA does, and Tim Wyatt do, Becky and Becky Silva do an incredible amount of positive things for the network and peer organizations. I've been on the SEA board for probably a little over a year in my sort of role as sort of as one of the lieutenants of working full time in the SEA organizations, and I'd sort of co-chair the membership committee and work with one of the other board members to lead that, and then also on the committee to do the actual reviews. So it started, I think, in 2013. I think there was a recognition that we wanted to have more of a not oversight, but just a more of a window in terms of how SEA could support member organizations and let people know from a national benchmarking standpoint how they were doing relative to their peers. And I think that in the 7 years that I've been doing this, I think I've maybe reviewed about 10 programs. Personally, for me, it's incredibly rewarding because I'm able to go and do a deep dive with a program over 2 days, really meet with the board, meet with the staff, spend tons of time with the executive director, hopefully provide some insights that are sometimes I think you overestimate the impact you can have coming in 2 days, and sometimes you can underestimate it. I think, but there's sometimes you can see things that maybe the organization hasn't seen, or maybe if they've seen them, they haven't maybe highlighted them. And I think that's probably the goal. And then there's obviously there's a report that is based on data, but there's also a narrative component. So we're looking at health of organization, health of program. You're looking at the fundraising, and yeah, I think there's generally I don't think it's a perfect system, but I think that the reviews are generally fairly accurate. And I think they're all done in the spirit of improvement and collaboration with the member organization. And you're really looking at how you can provide some helpful information. So I was just out in Oakland and San Francisco visiting Lauren Pertuzio at Squash Drive. And it was wonderful. We just had 2 days going deep in the program. I learned a ton. We turned around the report very quickly and had a board call, and then hopefully it gave them some energy and ability to kind of go forward and aggressively go to the next steps, which for them I think include facility and things like that.
So within your 10 reports that you've done, do you see any commonalities or patterns that come together?
Yes, I think it's probably a little cliche, but it's really stems in leadership. If you have a good board chair and executive director who are working well together, you're probably going to have high quality programming and a solid fundraising activities. I think it really does come down to leadership in a lot of ways. And I think that's probably the one thing that stands out across all the reviews. And we're very lucky in the SEA network to have an incredible group of leaders. And I think actually with that leadership, you'll see some organizations can become a little static over time. And I think with a strong leadership, you'll see continued focus on growth and improvement. And that can be across a lot of factors, not just number of students or number of dollars, but just improvement in the quality of programming and in some of the details as well.
And you touched on Squash Drive. Now they're looking to try and build a facility, and I feel like that's a common arc within most of these programs. And going back to MetroSquash, I mean, you guys were one of the first facilities, or the top 5 first facilities to be built. Talk about that journey, and when did you first decide that you wanted to have a home facility?
I was really from day one. I think it was very top of mind. I think we actually looked. So we opened the facility in 2015, which was 10 years to the day of our founding, or at least our certificate of our nonprofit status with the IRS. It was April 1st, 2005, when we had the nonprofit status approved by the IRS. April 1st, 2015, when we got the certificate of occupancy from the city of Chicago.
Oh, wow.
So very cool milestones there. And I think it was, so yes, it started day one, but it's one thing to sort of have it as an aspiration, and then another whole other thing in terms of we had a lot of fits and starts. We had different locations, but I think if you setting it out as the intention was very important. And the reason was that there was different schools of thought. It's like people would say not every program needs a facility. But I think for us in Chicago, it was very clear because we didn't have year-to-year security in terms of our squash court space. So the University of Chicago was a great partner, but we had a year-to-year contract. They decided to do something with the gym, which actually they close it down from May to October. So even before we had the facility, it was slightly under threat. So you've got to really think about the long-term sustainability of the program, and squash courts is one of the key things. So if you can't trust that you're going to have squash courts, how do you kind of go out and convince people that you've got like a great program? That so for us, it was like we really felt like the program really deserved a home. The programming was high quality, and in order to be sustainable for the future, we had to do this. So I think there was an ongoing kind of drumbeat to work towards that. But gosh, the time between 2012 and 2015 when we opened was probably one of the more rewarding and stressful times of my life. I think there were many times. I think the tendency is to look at a building and see it filled with kids, and we got 2,000 people coming through here a year outside of the program, and you say, oh, well, of course it was going to happen no matter what, and it really wasn't. There were many times, as a lot of people who are very close to the project in Chicago can attest to, particularly 2013 and 2012, when we didn't think the project was going to happen, and it could have been 4 courts instead of 8. It could not have happened at all. We were really pushing to get the University of Chicago involved financially, and a lot of people, since we're right next to the University of Chicago, people would say, well, what's the University of Chicago doing? Or let me know when they're involved. And so it was a bit of a chicken and egg. And it really took one lead funder stepping up from a private equity company called Madison Dearborn Partners in Chicago and his family to really make that happen. So
What I love to spend a little bit of time on is that journey of, and the uncertainty that people go through in trying to build a facility, because I think people are only used to when they see it open versus I think you articulated that pretty accurately, the ups and downs that you go towards. And I mean, was there a point that you're ever thinking about giving up and just trying to make do, or how did you approach that?
I think there must have been points where certainly there was a lot of doubt, or self-doubt, or wondering whether we could make this happen. I think probably the blessing and the curse was also that I think I was so invested personally and professionally in this. Like I felt like if I couldn't get this done, that I think I would have been just felt as a personal failure. So I think that's really important. Certainly wasn't like a life or death thing, but it certainly felt like in terms of I was totally invested personally and professionally in making this happen. And I think that makes a difference. If your back's up against the wall, you're really going to weather the kind of the tough times. You're going to hear a lot of people say no and not agree with it, or just keep pushing. So for me, that was important. And I remember I would come over, to the empty lot. We had the lot. We had a lot of pieces in place before we had the fundraising. So we had the land, it's just we didn't have any money. And I remember I just come up and I just park across the street and I just stare at the lot or get out and walk around. And I remember thinking back then, I said to myself, whatever, I know there's probably, if we build this place, I know there's going to be continuing challenges, and you got to keep fundraising or whatever. But I said to myself back then, I said, no matter what happens in the future, like, it'll be worth it. And if we can just get this thing done. And so I always look back on that when I'm having tough times or we have challenges which are ongoing. I always look back at that moment, and I definitely feel very proud that there was Chicago, a lot of people in the civic, corporate, foundation, donor community. Once we kind of got our teeth stuck in and had this one donor in particular really step up, that we were able to make it happen. But I think you're right. I think that's when you look back, it could have. I don't know that it was just by dint of hard work and effort and commitment. I think there was luck involved. I think there was timing. There were a number of factors, but I never doubted the quality of the program. I always knew that the students and the program deserved to have a world-class center. And I think that was never in doubt. And so I can't underestimate that foundation really, really, really helped.
Absolutely. What do you think was one of the more crucial parts of getting Madison Dearborn to go from, and it could have been potentially anyone, but to get going from the uncertainty to get them to commit at that level? What do you think were some key ingredients?
Well, the gentleman, Doug Grissom, and also Nick Alexis, who was at Madison Dearborn at the time. They were both on the board. That makes a difference. Being on the board makes a difference, and people are more invested when they're on the board. They're also closer to the decision making, and they feel more connected and more ready to act, I think. So Doug had been on the board for a little while, and I think he recognized, I think he had the vision that there was a real, I think, opportunity here that was maybe going to get missed out on. And I think we were just continuing to have meetings, continuing to sort of go back and talk to people. So it wasn't like a one-off. I think it was a continued relationship. And I think trying to keep people informed about what you're doing. I think sometimes you sort of think that you have to do everything yourself, and sometimes just putting the idea out there so that smart people can sort of see it and see that there's an opportunity there. So I think we just sort of kept the idea alive, and I think Doug and Nick sort of had the vision that this deserved to happen, and I think they probably saw that we were just really dead set on figuring out a way to make this happen. But they were taking a bet on me and also the organization that we were going to be successful if they invested in this.
And when did the decision come about to expand beyond the south side of Chicago?
It was about 2 years after being in the center. So we had a board retreat. We got everybody together at the Field Museum, which is where we hosted MetroSquash with Stu in 2007, and then where we'll be hosting our 15th anniversary gala in October. So it has a special place as is special to us in terms of our evolution, and we believed that we 2 years in the center, we were relatively at capacity, and we could certainly add maybe 5% more students, but we couldn't double the size of the program. We had a solid team implementing programming, and I think we were, it wasn't every voice on the board, but there were a number of voices who were like, well, how can we do more? And can we serve more students who would benefit from this relatively, I think, unique array of services and pathway programming. So, and then we had a number of different, people mentioned different neighborhoods, and Evanston came up as an idea. And that's where Northwestern is, and it's perceived as sort of this leafy suburb. But if you look closely, there are definitely significant areas of need, particularly in Southwest Evanston. And so we said, okay, let's explore that. We knew that there were courts at the McGaw YMCA. We went to, a week later, had a meeting with leadership at the McGaw Y, and they saw us as being a mission-aligned organization, as we saw the same with them. Saw these courts on the fifth floor that were underutilized, and they said, well, yeah, we could come talk about an agreement to be able to use the courts. From there, we went to the two neediest schools in Evanston, sat down with the principals, and it was, we were able to get in to see them fairly quickly. We showed them video, talked about the program, and both of them were like, "This is great. Where do we sign up?" And so it wasn't without challenges the whole process, but from sometimes those things like getting into the connecting with the principal, one, getting in to see principals can be challenging, and two, having them see the value of something so clearly. A lot of times you're trying to explain what squash is and why it can benefit the students. So that was really how things got started, and we launched programming probably a year a year after the an idea came about. And now, we had a little bit of a slow start in terms of trying to get the first few months of recruiting students and getting uptake from students. And then now that's just, I think, taken off. We've 35 students in the program. We're over capacity. We have a wait list at Chute Middle School, which is the neediest school in Evanston. And I think we've demonstrated in a little over a year and a half that the program is viable. There's students who need the program, and we're trying to say, okay, well, how do we make this sustainable in Evanston for the future? Because it's clear that we fill a really vital need in the community.
And what does that mean? Do you think more courts are going to be needed in short order?
Yeah, well, I think in general in Chicago, there are more courts that are needed. In Chicago, there's so much more demand than there is supply in terms of courts. So we really, Chicago is desperate for more courts, and not just from a Metros, from just a junior player perspective. It's a perfect city for squash. So, and certainly, that applies for us in Evanston as well. I think the question is, how do we do that? I think we have an aggressive and conservative board at the same time, but I think everybody feels like, gosh, do we need to raise another $8 million in Evanston? Do we need to double our budget? So I think there's some trepidation about our operating costs and also doing a big capital raise. So one of the things we're looking at, this community squash model that's becoming more prevalent in the U.S., or having more outside of urban squash usage, or combined usage at different times of day. So how can we make Evanston programming sustainable with with some different partnership models? And Woodlawn is going great, but the program and the facility was really designed to serve the urban component of the program. We do have U Chicago lab school, we have tournaments, but 9 to 3 during the day. The facility is certainly not utilized to the full extent, and not monetized during that time either. So I think we're just trying to think creatively about how we can make sure that 10, 20 years down the road that the program is set up for success.
Yeah, it's been interesting to see the different types of, as the growth of squash has been continuing to go on, the different models that are being used. You touched on community squash, which I think is a very interesting one. And another one, I guess a partnership approach would be the expansion of Squash Busters to Providence, and with the Moses Brown Squash Busters and the community squash there. So that there's some similar to, I guess, back in the day when MetroSquash was being realized. We can point or look at other opportunities to what's incorporated in Chicago. And I think you're completely right that Chicago needs more courts. It's everything from the junior level, the MetroSquash, but even at the professional level, seeing it's now the site of the largest prize money events in the world. So I mean, there's really just there's something going on there with squash and growth.
Yeah, we've definitely been punching above our weight for a long time now. And, John Flanagan and the Walter family, really transforming, professional squash, and what that can mean for players is just unbelievable. And there is an effort underway currently to build more courts, still in the early stages, but has tons of potential that Doug Grissom and a number of people are looking at to provide access. There's a number of 9 or 10 high school teams with very limited access to court time, and it's just I think it's you know I think poised for a lot of growth. I think if we can get an additional facility, then you might see even more. And then we hope to, down the road, it'd be I think each city is a little bit different in terms of how you can actualize, this community squash model and what the definition of community squash can change on the city in the city as well. But I think there is potential in Chicago to have a blended facility, maybe a very large blended facility down the road.
Absolutely. Oftentimes we get very immersed in our own sport, but for context, and I don't always like this comparison of looking at tennis just because it's such a different beast. But look at how many tennis courts or even paddle courts there are in Chicago, and where squash is now to where it could be, I think is just continuing down that path of growth. So it's exciting. One of the things that is not to be underestimated is the role that urban squash programs play on bringing the community together. And within Chicago, MetroSquash has played such a key role there, uniting the downtown to the suburbs. And really, you've been helping rallying the troops behind a cause. And so huge credit to you there. And we could spend a whole bunch of time talking just about all your successes in MetroSquash, but I'd also love to turn the table a little bit and talk about you and your path to getting to MetroSquash. So talk a bit about where your squash background and where you came from.
I would love to. Can I go back? There's two sort of families that I want to kind of mention first before we do
Absolutely.
that. So yeah, I think because you mentioned community and bringing people together. There's been two, like we talked about, Doug Grissom, Nick Alexis, and obviously our board has been unbelievable. Our board is an incredible engine and led by Brian Sedlak, and we've had some wonderful past chairs as well: Peter Dunn, Paul Cusson, Jackie Moss, James Johnson. There's really, some incredible leadership at MetroSquash. And then two people who are the Hussein family who named our building. We raised, $8 million to build the building, but we hadn't named it until 2 years afterwards. And the Hussein family stepped up, and they've been a huge part of the growth of squash in Chicago, and particularly MetroSquash. And then one other family is the Dolan family. Danny Dolan is our vice chair. He did an incredible fundraising effort to raise, again, after 2 years after the facility was built, to name the Squash Center for Henry Beenan, who's the past president of Northwestern, who's also on our board, and my squash doubles partner. So, and then Danny is now, along with Adam Gertchen and Nick Alexis, co-chairing our gala this fall in October 22nd. And I don't know, I'm very appreciative of the efforts that a lot of people are putting in. I think you hear people, not necessarily in the Urban Squash Network, but across nonprofits in general, talk about really trying to galvanize their boards and wishing for more active board members. And we're just really fortunate in Chicago to have an incredibly active and engaged board of directors.
Thanks, for spelling that out. It is amazing. I've said this many times, but it's amazing what a community can do when they get behind a shared vision and really just elevate projects or achieve goals that would seem impossible from the outset. So thanks for sharing that. So turning the tables back to you, talk about the path that led you to MetroSquash.
Yeah, I was trying to avoid having to talk about myself. That's why I brought up all our board members, but maybe there's no way out. I'm Canadian. I think I've tried to get my Canadian accent, as minimized as possible to avoid discrimination that Canadians usually feel while they're in the US. And so squash is a big part of growing up. I started playing when I was 7 years old, and it was a great passport for me. A lot of my great friends are still great friends, are squash players. So being able to travel around the country as a junior just gave a sense of adventure that a lot of my peers outside of squash didn't seem to have, and I felt very lucky to have that and have those experiences at tournaments on weekends. And then, a tournament now feels like it's over in about 30 seconds. But I remember when you're a kid, that Friday, Saturday, Sunday can feel like forever. And so some really wonderful childhood memories, and also joy at, being able to see and discover things. And then that led to being able to go to Princeton, which wouldn't have happened without squash, and the experience I was able to have there, which would not have been replicated in Canada. So I think just really lucky, and I think that's also I think that foundation has sort of led me to like a lot of squash players really feel passionately about the game for
Well,
one, but also more
just
about
quickly
like yeah.
on Princeton. I mean, you were part of the team that won a national championship, right?
I was. Yeah, I lost my match in the finals, but who remembers stuff like that? Right. No, feel like I let down my team there, but fortunately, teammates stepped up and we were able to beat Harvard in '93, and it was a long time before Princeton won again. So that '93 championship team remains incredibly proud of that accomplishment.
Yeah. I mean, that's a huge distinction to achieve. And you're also a Canadian junior champion, correct?
In hardball, yeah, yeah.
Hardball.
So
Okay.
yeah, hardball, yeah.
So you graduate from college, and what's next on the agenda for David K?
Well, I think I probably fit in that category of not knowing what the heck I wanted to do. And I think I had a lot of ambition and drive, but didn't quite know where I wanted to put it. So I ended up being a teaching pro at the Union Club in New York and spent 2 years doing that, and then was able to take over the head pro position, and then was head pro at the Union Club for 5 years. So 7 years total. And that was a wonderful place, wonderful people, but I always felt that I was just wanted something different and I wanted to feel like I was having an impact. And I think I was searching and hadn't really found what I really wanted to dedicate my energy to. And so from there, I went to University of Rochester and was coaching the men's team there for 2 seasons and also doing my MBA. And then that's in I think spring of 2005 is when we connected and started the process of moving out to Chicago. And to be honest, like that was really I think the start of my what has given me meaning in my life is this journey with MetroSquash over the past 15 years.
You didn't mention your success on the doubles tour, so I'm gonna have to draw that out of you. When did you
Yeah,
pick up on?
you can keep drawing. You're very nice to draw. I think well, you might personal achievements, but I don't know. Being number, I'm always told by one of our board members that I was number two on the doubles tour, but really that's number two as a team. So I'm barely top five. So I don't mean to be self-deprecating, but usually the personal accomplishments you sort of look to the like shoot why couldn't I have been number one, but I did get up to a decent level in the professional doubles and really enjoyed the experience.
Well, in doubles, they always say the number one strategy is just picking a good partner. So it sounds like you knew how to execute on that strategy.
Yeah, maybe I wasn't even in the top 10. Maybe I just had a great a partner who could have been number one.
Well, beyond what you've accomplished in the squash world, what's always fascinating me about you is also your diversity of other interests. And so we can talk about some of your ventures outside of squash world, and there's many to touch on. And I know how much you love talking about yourself, but I'm going to force you to do it. So karate, how did you pick up karate?
I I was in New York and I don't know exactly. I can't remember how I actually started. I think I just wanted to do some sort of something self-defense related. I end up going to a fairly traditional, karate school. And again, it's like being number two. I actually didn't get a black belt. I got brown belt with black tips. And then I kind of lost interest a little bit in karate and was getting more into yoga at the time. And that was probably when my game was at its best, is when I was doing a lot of karate and then yoga. They were very, complementary to the squash I was playing in the doubles tour.
And how long were you studying karate for?
I think 5 or 6 years.
That's not an insignificant amount of time to dedicate towards another sport. And what fueled you in terms of driving you to keep going through each belt?
I think you want to get to the next level and something. I really did. I think at that time in my life, I really appreciated the discipline and the structure of it. And that's also actually at the end what led me to want to move away from it. I thought there was a little bit of a deification of like past masters and like so and so was just such an incredible person and had no flaws and they were just could defeat 10 men with a single punch. And I really enjoyed the discipline of it, but I didn't really enjoy that sort of hierarchical kind of enforced hierarchy of it at the end of the day. But it was great. It's wonderful hard work. It's wonderful to be in a system where you kind of know what's going to happen next. But eventually I kind of moved away from that to sort of yoga, which sort of made a bit more spiritual sense to me. And then I ended up having a couple of injuries of, back surgery and snapped Achilles, which was probably a result of doing a bit too much. And then since then, it's been a slow, modest to rapid physical decline. And now I'm trying to do what I can to at 47 to think about balance, long-term health, and things like that.
Quickly going back to your yoga experience, because you really dived in pretty deep to yoga. And didn't you also go to, was it India for a retreat, if I remember
Yeah,
correctly?
I went to India to study with Patabi Joyce, who founded Ashtanga Yoga, and I spent a month there studying with him and his grandson Sharath. And unfortunately, so Patabi Joyce has since died, but also had a number of accusations related to the Me Too movement. So, there's certainly the dark side to yoga that's been coming out to the very much to the fore, which I think is probably engendered by kind of that kind of worship of the guru or the person at the
Mm.
top of the pyramid. But it was an incredible experience. India is probably it's just one of the more remarkable places in the world, and I think being able to experience India while really intensely studying yoga was definitely an experience I'll never forget.
Well, speaking of travel, I know recently you accomplished something that few people on the planet have done, and you have traveled to all 7 continents in the world.
Yes, I am so thrilled. We're just in New Zealand recently, and that was number 7. And I just think it's a cool thing. I think it's hard to estimate how many people in history have traveled to all 7 continents, but only 1 million people have traveled to Antarctica, and that's, I'm sure, increasing every year. But then you have to discount it, like how many people who have traveled to Antarctica have also been to all 7 continents. So my guess is that there's probably 500,000 to 750,000 people who have traveled to all 7 continents. And I think we want to bring those people together and celebrate that group. And I think squash players generally love travel and love to be able to experience the world through different lenses. And I'm quite chuffed that I was able to get that experience.
So, quickly, I want you to go through each one of the continents and just give your high level takeaway of what you appreciated most about that trip or visit or culture that resonates most with you in that continent.
That that's a good one. Okay, North America, born here. Let me just leave it at that. I love America. I'm a Canadian, but I really like. I think I like the angst and the diversity of American life, and that is in a good way. And also, I love the bad things about America too, and its contradictions. And I think being part of living in America now for over 25 years. I think it's an incredible place. And I love the city of Chicago. It's one of the most fascinating cities in the world. South America, great. Yeah, not sure. Yeah, I don't know if I can answer that one, Connor. It's just a little tough to think of a soundbite for each continent.
Was there
Antarctica
anything,
cold?
well,
Does that help?
with I don't know, with South America, what was, if you think back to your experience there, and was there anything about the culture that that caught your eye? You're very insightful. So, what is it that you learned while you're there, or just a memory?
I thought Buenos Aires was run down. I would say South America run down. They called Buenos Aires the Paris of South America. I was like, well, that's great, but maybe you could fix some of the cracked sidewalks. So yeah, I'd say that's a soundbite for South America. Just kind of clean it up a little bit.
All right. Where else in the world?
Antarctica, probably polar plunge with penguins. I think doing a polar plunge and then just looking to your left and seeing a penguin
Did
swimming
you
next
actually
to
go
you.
in the water?
Oh yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, so I think that
How did
makes
your
me
body react to that?
it's terrifying. And you're immediately, at least for me, I know people can train themselves to be able to swim in water like that for at least some period of time. But for me, it was total fight or flight. And you think, okay, I can handle this. I'm going to submerge and stay there for a few seconds. And you submerge, and all you can think about, your mind totally goes to just get me the heck out of here.
How long were you actually in the water for?
As little time as possible. I literally submerged, and then I was getting out as fast as I could.
And how long did it take before your body temperature got back to some sort of normal semblance?
Once you're out of the water and you've got some clothes, you're pretty panicked to get some, clothes or towel back on. But once that happened, you sort of come back to reality. But yeah, it was a great experience. And if somebody suggests doing a polar plunge in Chicago, it's very easy to say, well, I did it in Antarctica. I feel like I checked that box.
I feel like you get bragging rights for at least a year or so, you know?
Yeah, I think that's fair.
So what about Asia?
Asia, I remember as being, well, India was obviously a powerful experience, but also being in Nepal was really great. And doing the Annapurna range was really great. And so trekking in the Himalayas was very special. China and visiting the Shaolin Temple, I actually did that with a group of karate students, and visiting, sort of learning a little bit about kung fu was really great. And the most reason, and then to go to Australasia, New Zealand was just an unbelievable experience. And I was just blown away by the people, the way they treated the country with respect. And that was a wonderful place. And Africa, I guess I can do Africa too. I've been Morocco, and also I think probably from a physical standpoint in 2016 was climbed Mount Kilimanjaro with a good friend of mine from Canada who's in much better shape than me, but and figured he didn't have to train because he figured he'd be in better shape than I was, which he was, but he also had to get evacuated off the mountain and was close to dying, but was unfortunately was able to get rescued. But I sort of once we knew he was safe, I knew that I could continue to the summit.
Wow. And then what about Europe?
Europe is just elegance and sophistication, and just, I think, wonderful, particularly Paris.
So having traveled to all seven continents, has that scratched your itch for travel, or do you foresee a lot more in your future?
I think so, but I think it's also wherever you go, there you are. And I think I've traveled to places and been just kind of, grumpy and miserable. And I think being able to appreciate where you are in the moment, wherever you are, and to be comfortable in your own skin is really wonderful. And if you can combine that with being in a really interesting and new place, that's just perfect.
Well, I'm going to shift gears a little bit. And this is something I've noticed about you over the time I've known you, is that you're someone who likes challenges and you like goals. And you have set a goal for, is it 2021 that you're aiming for?
2022, 22.
2022. Okay.
Yeah.
And this is to swim the English Channel.
Yes.
Tell me, how did you even come up with thinking of that?
Probably in a bit of a, what's the word, macabre way. There was a read about an open water swim. I think one of the Eight Bridges swims in the Hudson, and a famous doctor in the Obama administration had passed away had a heart attack while swimming one of these, I think, 20-mile interbridge swims. And I read about him, and then I did a bit more reading, and I read why he liked these open water swims. And he just had, I think, an article or a blog post about what he liked about it, and just being in the water, and just the challenge, but also the peacefulness of it, and the connection with nature. That kind of really spoke to me. And so I think as I've gotten older, and I have a big frame, so squash, I enjoy playing squash, but it's also doesn't feel therapeutic. And so when I swim, I feel really great when I get out of the water. And I feel like I'm stretched out. I feel healthier. I feel better, more able to tackle the day and have better energy over the course of the day. So I know I like swimming, and I know I can swim for a long period of time without really thinking about it. Whereas most exercise, it's like, okay, when is this going to be over? And so, and I do like a goal, and I also like a goal that has some mystery and romance to it. And swimming the English Channel, I always remember as a kid, like that was just something that just seemed so otherworldly and challenging, and kind of totally out of the realm of the possible for somebody to do. So there was just, I think, a combination of something that keeps me healthy, something that has a long-term pathway to it, and that gets me, fired up. And unfortunately, I don't think I'm as advanced enough psychologically as a person to be able to actually, sensibly exercise on a regular basis without having some ridiculous long-term goal.
So let's break this down. The English Channel is it? Am I correct? It's 21 miles.
That's correct.
So how long do you think that on average will take someone to cross
I
swimming?
think I think there's been some incredible, like, I think it was first crossed in 1875. There's been 2,400 people who have done an accredited swim to date as solo, done solo, not in relay, and accredited by the Channel Swimming Association. And I think the fastest time would probably be about a little under 8 hours, maybe even faster. I'd have to look it up, but between 6 and 8 hours, I think, which is pretty like professional. And then the slowest, I think, was 35 or 37 hours. So I think probably somewhere in the middle of that. I guess if I, one, I'd just love to be successful doing it, no matter how long it took. But if I could do it between 20 and 25 hours, that'd be great. I'm not a very fast swimmer, so I think I'd probably be pretty plodding with it.
So you mentioned an accredited swim. What does that mean?
That means that you cannot be in contact with anybody else. You have a pilot boat, but you have to feed during the times as you're in the water for a while. You have to, I think one of the, reason why people aren't successful is hypothermia, and you do need to kind of keep your energy up through feeding. So you get fed on a pole. They'll hand you whatever food you decide you need to eat, and you can wear a swimming cap, goggles, I think a nose clip, I think earplugs. I'm not sure, and then you got to wear Speedo, and that's it. So no wetsuit or anything like that. So the water can vary, I think, between 50 and 60 degrees or so in temperature. So you need to get comfortable swimming for long periods of time in relatively cold water.
What do you foresee as what you're going to eat while you're swimming?
Yeah, that's a good question. Probably not, probably something easily consumable and not too chewy, because I think, you obviously have to be treading water while you're feeding. And I haven't thought about the specifics yet, but I think you want to be able to get it in you very quickly, because the longer you're treading water, the more you're likely to drift off course. So even
Mm.
feeding for a minute, the difference between feeding for 5 minutes versus a minute can really take you off course. And so if you look, it's not if you look at the path that people take, it's not a straight line. You start out, and the current will draw you south, I believe, or west, and then you sort of come back, and then you come back in, I think, with the tide. I think so.
Oh wow.
I've still got a little time to research the specifics, but right now I'm just focused on spending as much time in the water as possible.
I think with the growing trend of marathon runners and marathons just expanding so much, people are probably familiar with that, but very unfamiliar with anyone trying to take on a challenge like this. So, quickly in your training, what's your monthly goal? How are you going about to get on track for this 21-mile crossing?
So the reason I picked time, 2022, is that that's when I turned 50, and also gives me over 2 years to prepare. So it's very modest right now. I think I started January 1. I swam 20 hours in January. I had just one 2 hour swim. In February, I did a 3 hour swim and two 2 hour swims, and swam over 20 hours. And so for March is trying to do 25 hours and a 4 hour swim. But I also, I need to get more sophisticated in the training and probably need to work with a coach. But I'll probably start that in 2021. I think this year I just want to really get comfortable in the water, get comfortable with longer swims. And then obviously, once it warms up a little bit, start getting in Lake Michigan and start getting comfortable with open water swims, because the open water is really dramatically different than swimming in a pool, as I'm sure any triathlete or serious swimmer would know. It really does take a lot more energy, and there's so many different variables. Like in a pool, you have a lane, you can stay on track. And open water, you have to spend time and energy thinking about how to stay on track. And then certainly the English Channel presents some unique challenges. Jellyfish is really bad. I was reading about somebody who lost a layer of their tongue while they were swimming across, and were just in the water about 25 hours. And then it's also a major shipping lane. So there's just a lot of external factors to be working through. But I think at the end of the day, it still comes down to trying to build up your tolerance and your willpower. And that's I'm going to try to do that in a number of different ways.
Well, it's one of the more impressive challenges I've known someone to undertake. So I applaud you for even considering it, and we'll be excited to track your progress. And are you going to do this for any particular cause, or just the David K. accolades, or what are you thinking there?
Well, first of all, it's really nice to just say you're doing something and have people be impressed by it. But I really do want to do it. I think, but it's just funny to say, oh, I'm going to try to swim the English Channel. And like people are like, man, that's really impressive. But I think it's only really impressive if you really make a serious attempt. But I think MetroSquash would certainly be top of the list in terms of, I think there's a lot of people in Chicago who I've said I was going to do it and they just start laughing. And some people say, "Oh my God, that's amazing," and that's really great. And some people say, "There's no freaking way you're going to be able to do it." So I think that's actually just gives me a lot of fuel, and proving people wrong is probably one of the strongest motivators out there. So I think, but from a charity standpoint, I think I'd love to do it for MetroSquash, and also, potentially maybe my nephew has cystic fibrosis, so maybe I can do something for that as well.
Well, that's great. And now we have this, not only that you're socializing it in your conversations, but now we have it broadcasted. So you can really, we're going to hold your feet to the fire on trying to get that done.
Well, I hope so, and I really do want to have this broadcast to as many people as possible. I think it just seeing James Dodson as having the most number of listens really kind of that also spurs my competitive juices as well. So I'm hoping I can surpass James in the most listened to squash radio podcast.
Well, I'm sure with your determination that will be done in quick order. So before I close out this interview, what I have is some standard questions I ask all the guests that come on the show, and would love to get. So there is an end in sight for you, David. I know how uncomfortable you get talking about yourself, but I appreciate you taking the time. So we'll start off with an easy one. What is your favorite movie or documentary?
Uh, Clockwork Orange, Sound of Music, documentaries, Helvetica.
Oh, I just heard about that one, but I was struggling to try and find where I could watch it. So I'll have to. What did you like about Helvetica?
It just makes you look at typeface in a whole different way, and it kind of opens up a side to the world that a lot of people don't, who aren't designers and in the profession. That so I find it really fascinating.
There was a speech that Steve Jobs gave once, and with the opening thesis
Hmm.
being that when he studied calligraphy, it was really one of the seeds that helped him even with the inspiration of the iPhone. So it's just interesting learning about all these non-connected parts of life that suddenly can make sense in other areas.
Hmm. Absolutely.
So I'm going to give you a scenario where you have to give a TED talk, but the rules are that you can't give it for something that you're publicly known for. I'll allow part of your past experiences that that aren't widely known to be included in this. But if you had to go learn something new and share, what would you want to explore and share with the rest of the world?
Well, I do have a love for this, and we haven't talked about it, so I will use it as an example. I would love to do something on classical music. It's been a love of mine since it was passed on by my father and my mother, but particularly my father. And I really picked up on it when I was 18 years old, and it was really like as closest thing as I've had to an epiphany in terms of a love for something. So I would love to find a way to share my love for classical music with others in a TED Talk.
And this is something that you studied at Princeton, right? You wrote your thesis on?
I did. I wrote my thesis on Soviet opera, Russian opera by Shostakovich called Lady Macbeth of Minsk. So that's clearly had a big impact in my viability as a professional and made me lots of money. No, I'm just kidding. It's that, but it has been really interesting to study music from a historical perspective and see how the artists really got treated so poorly under Stalin.
And just quickly talking about your appreciation for music, does it go about the history or the actual music itself, how the composers compose it? What is it that really scratches your itch?
It's both. It's really the combination. I think the music is just there's something about a piece of music can really make you tear up, it's hard to feel that way, maybe even about a book or I think a movie can. There's just something visceral about music, more so than a piece of art, another painting or something like that. So I just feel like music really speaks to me, and in terms of discovering a new piece of music, I think is really wonderful. And I think there's just so many wonderful stories of composers, and I think it's the same through, whether it's art, architecture, you can really learn about the history through the lens
Mm.
of 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 an artist and what they went through. And artists usually had, pretty dramatic lives. In the 19th century, pretty much all of them ended in death by syphilis. So these guys were living pretty interesting lives, often short and tragic. But you can, I think, seeing what's going on in the society around them. There's an independence, but there's also a connectivity where you can't disassociate the artist from the time that they lived in.
And if you, because I'm sure whenever you mention classical music, certain people have an assumption or natural reaction. But if we wanted to try and demystify that to get someone to try classical music in a new way, what would be your prescription for, where to start?
I think just starting with what you enjoy listening to. I think there's some wonderful, Beethoven, Bach, Brahms, Mozart, all the big guys are great. I just think that you sort of hear, oh, it's just kind of something you put on in the background, and I just think there's just some really intense emotional pieces that you should just be turning up to 11.
Great. So next question is what gets you fired up? And this could be either something, because we're so immersed in squash world, it could be something within squash world or outside of it. But what gets you either fired up in a positive way or just really frustrated and negative, but it takes you to action? So what gets you fired up?
I think I came in this morning thinking about, like, how the heck are we going to manage some challenges around the market and the coronavirus? And nobody wants to wish crisis or challenge upon themselves. But I also felt pretty fired up. And I said, I have a real role to play in terms of figuring out how to protect this organization, figure out the best way for us forward. So, I think there's an element to stepping up to a challenge and crisis, or something that pulls you out of the day-to-day routine that is thrilling in a way.
And how are you looking to tackle that? I mean, that's a pretty daunting task and certainly uncertain or not scripted. So how are you looking to tackle that?
I think there's some specific things that we need to know from a logistics standpoint. We have a big event in April that we're potentially looking at postponing. There's a lot of communication that needs to take place. You need to, I think, making sure that you're getting people invested in the decision, and it's not just coming from you and you're hearing a lot of different viewpoints, which is what we've been doing. And I think really what you've got to do at times like this is just work harder. And from a fundraising perspective, we've been in a bull market for 11 years, and it's never easy to fundraise, but I think you can do a lot with hard work, and particularly when things get more challenging and there's more competition for the same resources. That's when you really need to knuckle down and put the time in.
Well said. My next question goes, and maybe this is tied in, but I want to share with the listeners something that has inspired you, and if it's like a video or something easily on the web that we can link towards or share. What have you YouTube talk or anything like that? What has been one of the most impactful or inspiring pieces of content you've digested?
Yeah, let me just go current on that, because I think just talk with one of the women I work with. This group called Bonfire hosted Tony Schwartz, who has a couple of books. I think it's The Power of Positive Thinking, or maybe its most recent one is The Way We're Working Isn't Working, and it's really
Mm-hmm.
about energy management versus time management, and how we very rarely take time to reflect and recharge, and we work in cycles, and generally, whether it's 4 hours a day or 90 minutes at a time. And I think valuing being able to recharge, and rather than thinking that we're just on the linear work as hard as you can until you collapse, So that's just a different way of thinking in terms of energy management versus time management and trying to be more 100% when you're tackling something, be really 100% in and then try to relax. It's almost like it's a rhythmic, you're inhaling and then exhaling. You're really working hard and then you're recovering, you're working hard and you're recovering. It's also connected with what professional athletes do and how I think training methods have improved so that athletes have much more longevity in their careers. And I think it's going to be, I think that's sort of starting to trickle down into the professional workforce as well, in how we can be more productive. And I think looking at things to the way we have looked at things before from just a purely time management perspective, I think that energy management perspective is something that I'm starting to explore and I think is really, really interesting.
It completely fascinates me as well. And another theory along that is effectiveness versus efficiencies. You can be very efficient at writing an email, but if you write an effective email to 10 people, that can have the most amount of impact. So effort versus impact. And I got turned on to that book recently, The Way We're Working Isn't Working. And it was very helpful in terms of contextualizing where I'm going in my next phase of my career is really just leaning into what gives me energy, what are my strengths, and really focusing on that to highlight not only making myself happy, because if I'm happy, then I'm going to be more effective and better at what I do. So I think it's completely fascinating to me as well. So the last question to close out on is if you could recommend any book or books that you've read, what has been most impactful?
I really liked Sapiens, and I'm going to mess up his name, but that's why I won't even try it. Sapiens was just, I thought, a wonderful book. Just great overview of human history, really terrifying in some ways. I found it more inspiring than terrified, but that would be my book recommendation and something that really changed the way I look at the world around me.
Well, I really appreciate you taking the time this morning to talk, and I've always loved our conversations over the years, and now just to have one archived or encapsulated on Squash Radio is a true pleasure for me. So thank you for taking the time and also going back to MetroSquash, because I think that's really been such a way that you have distinguished yourself, but by doing so, put MetroSquash as a pillar of the Chicago community, the pillar of the Midwest, but also in the United States, and having such an important role. So thank you for all your leadership there. And sounds like the next chapter it's not going to be easy, but you have just an amazing foundation to build off of. And again, so thank you for taking the time to be here.
Well, Connor, let me also say thank you, because you really changed my life over 15 years ago by believing in me and taking a chance in me to lead this effort in Chicago. And what we're doing in Chicago would not have happened without you. And I think your openness and energy of spirit, your willingness to try new things and experiment is really inspiring to me. So thank you for the opportunity to connect with you today.
Well, we'll look forward to the 2020 tracker that will come out on David K crossing the English Channel, and we'll have a lot to celebrate, and also your 50th birthday. So more to come, but thank you again, and we'll stay in touch.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for your time today and for joining us on Squash Radio. We hope you enjoyed this latest episode. But before you leave, we just have one quick last message. As you know, Squash Radio wants to help tell some of the best stories from Squash World. But in order to do that, we want and welcome your help. Do you know a person or a story that involves squash that is interesting, funny, moved you care about, reflects your passion for the sport? Well, share it with us, and let's try and get it out there on the air. You can email me at squashradio@gmail.com or reach out to us on social media. Again, thanks for your time, and, well, until next time, be well and have fun.